This is We the Sales Engineers Podcast, show 136.
Welcome to We the SEs Podcast, the show for sales engineers by sales engineers with your host, Ramsey Majaba.
Mr. Binayak Kanungo, good morning.
Mr. Majaba, good morning.
Wow, never heard that one before. Not many people call me Mr. Marjaba, and I like it like that. Stop doing it.
Yeah. Maybe
How
I'm
you doing?
You want to see. I'm doing well, thanks. How are you?
I am doing well. I'm excited. I did a webinar yesterday.
That's right.
And
Tell us about it.
It was lots of fun. It's weird talking to a camera, but it was so interactive. People were just like talking back and forth on the chat. It was kind of distracting for me, but it was also fun because I knew there was somebody out there listening versus just. Have you done webinars for this, for your customers?
I have, yeah. Not at my current job, but at my last place, I've done a bunch, yeah.
Yeah, so that's the hardest thing where it's just crickets on the other end. You know, there's nothing there. But yeah, yesterday was good. Quick tip: if people are doing webinars for their customers, I would recommend you have an SE with you, a colleague with you, who with some questions primed up just to start a conversation there, because conversations are way more interesting than just presentations, my opinion.
100%. Yeah, and also it's a great opportunity, I guess, depending on the culture of your organization, it's a great opportunity to riff off each other and have just little silly jokes and whatnot that increase engagement. And I'd like to imagine increase the likability of you as a webinar host when you kind of just spit out different jokes, even if they fall flat. You could imagine that people are laughing on the other end because you can hear them anyways.
I agree with everything you said, except for depending on the culture of the company, because I don't care what the culture of the company is.
Perfect.
If they hired me for a reason. If they're going to be telling me not to make jokes, which happened in the past, and I completely disregarded that suggestion, it's worked out for me though. So, don't make bad jokes. Like, make bad jokes. Bad jokes are amazing, but don't make what's it called? Ill-mannered or
offensive,
insensitive jokes. Although right now anything could be insensitive to anybody at any time. So
that's true. Hey, that's offensive.
Yeah, so do it at your own risk. But bottom line, yeah, the webinar was great. We are launching the course, The Road to Sales Engineering, which that webinar was kind of a preview of that. If you are interested in listening to the replay, let me know. Send me an email, ramsey@wetheSalesEngineers.com. I can send you the link. The last 5 minutes is the sales pitch, if you will, where I talk about the course. If you don't want to listen to that, you don't have to. I think the material is I try to provide lots of value within the material itself. So, and that's the feedback that I got. That was very good.
And you're also, sorry, I hate to interrupt, but you're also saving people quite a bit of money as well for the value that you're giving them. What normally it would cost upwards of $250, $300, you're offering for less than $2, just under $2.
Well, but what I would say, you don't need the course. Let's just put it out there. You do not need the course. You can do everything on your own. I've done everything on my own without the course. If you want to accelerate it and you can afford it, do it. Don't go into debt to do it. For me, I'm against debt personally. So if that's what you're going to do, do not do that. There's a lot of free material on We the Sales Engineers that can get you through it.
Yeah.
This is just to accelerate it if you're interested.
Sure.
But all right, enough about that. I really enjoyed the webinar. I was trying to talk about the webinar. We did launch the course. If you want to check it out, it's wetheSalesEngineers.com/R2, the number 2, R2SE, Road to Sales Engineering.
Watch out for him in your next Star Wars movie.
What was that?
Watch out for R2SE in your next Star Wars movie. Because R2D2.
Yeah, I got it. We're talking about bad jokes. Yeah, so there's that. That's one subject. The next subject is we had an amazing guest by the name of John Hodgson. Yes, John Hodgson, who. So if you do you remember Dr. Amanda Rico? She was on our show. We talked about infographics and infographic resumes, and I didn't like them. She didn't like them. I don't remember what your stance was on that, Benny.
I don't remember. I think, based from that conversation, I don't quite remember. I know they're eye-catchy. I wasn't sure how they...
I think you have more of an open mind than I do. So I think you were kind of on the... You didn't have a positive or negative. I had a negative view of them. But John sent me a link to an article that he wrote about infographic resumes and why he's for them. There are caveats, which we will discuss on the show. And he's a recruiter specialized in sales engineering. So we'll talk about that, what recruiters are looking for, what managers are looking for. All right, let's jump into the show. Well, hello, John. Welcome to the show.
Hello, good to be here.
Thanks for coming on. The reason you got on the show was because you disagreed with me in one of the earlier podcasts. But before we get there, maybe you can introduce yourself to the people.
Yeah, of course. So my name is John Hodgson. I am an independent pre-sales specialist recruiter. I work mainly in the enterprise applications or SaaS space. About 50% of the roles that I work on are UK based, and the rest are across EMEA. So it's funny. I spend probably the vast majority of the conversations that I have every day are with people from pre-sales, and my LinkedIn feed is chock-a-block full of pre-sales, and you try to kind of immerse yourself into the world as much as possible, and follow content and listen to podcasts like yours, and you kind of develop a real like an affection and affinity for the profession and for the people, and at the same time sometimes I have to remind myself that I'm like an outsider looking in as a recruiter. And so when you asked me on, it was a real pleasant surprise, and it means a lot to me to be here, and I hope I'm able to provide some good information and add some value to your audience.
Yeah, well, again, the reason you're on is because you disagreed with me, and But before we get there, why did you choose the pre-sales world? And is your work more with organizations or with SEs themselves?
Right. Okay. So my work is with organizations, and often it's directly with hiring managers, also with recruiting teams, normally both in tandem. Yeah. And I suppose in terms of why pre-sales, in short, you're a great bunch of people to work with, and it's like an interesting, varied role to recruit against. And I find that people in pre-sales have a really nice mix of being, wanting to go to bed at night, having done a good job for the customer, wanting to have, to solve business problems and have kind of real business impact. You're all subject matter experts in some things, so you have that kind of substance to you. But at the same time, you have the kind of the snappiness and the dynamism and so on of the sales side. And so it's just a really nice combination. And when you have a good affinity for the people that you're working with, then the business results tend to follow. And then I think from a business perspective, I think that being a pre-sales specialist, I'm able to offer more value to customers and to clients. You know the role better. You know what good looks like. You're able to explain it better to candidates. And we've got you've got the market mapped out, and you kind of know where to look and how to identify top candidates, I suppose.
And so you mentioned something interesting there around you working primarily with, or your clients rather primarily being companies themselves.
Yeah.
Do you find, and maybe this has happened over time, maybe not, but has your definition of pre-sales or sales engineering kind of differed perhaps than what your clients tend to come into the conversation with? Or do you kind of find that there's a lot of maybe alignment between what they're looking for and kind of your preconception to what the role might require?
I would say it's pretty aligned, to be honest. And I think that especially within the SaaS worlds, there's lots of like cross-pollination of best practices and all that sort of thing. So obviously there are differences, and the larger vendors are different places, and it's a different role than at the smaller vendors that, but I would say on the whole, it's pretty aligned, to be honest.
And you mentioned something else. You said you're talking about what good looks like. What does good look like?
So I think that within the true ability, the ability to gain the kind of the true trust and credibility of the customer. I think combined with like the subject matter expertise or the ability to pick up the subject matter expertise within a reasonable time frame, to be able to kind of understand what the customer's looking to do, what the requirements are, and kind of how to map the solution against that. And then, like the communication skills to be able to clearly show the value and to excite and to bring customers with you. And then I think the fourth point would be, you're working with in account teams, you're working with account executives, so the ability to work effectively and kind of collaborate with salespeople, I suppose.
All right. Okay. We will.
How does that sound to you guys? Would you agree?
Yeah, you pretty much nailed it. I have nothing to add to it without just repeating what you just said. So thank you for that. So I do want to talk about that a little bit more, but we've been teasing the fact that you disagree with me. So what did you disagree with me about?
So I've listened to your podcast for a while now. Actually, it's quite surreal being here because I remember listening to it for the first time, being quite excited that there was a pre-sales podcast out there, because I think it was the first. And I remember at one point you were talking about CVs, and you talked about how you found that infographics, I think you didn't think they had enough depth in them, and your argument was that pre-sales is all about having the depth and so on, which I agree with as well. And so, and then I heard another podcast, and the same thing came up again. And I thought, hey, I've written an article on infographic CVs coincidentally. And I thought, hey, given that you've got such a big audience and you're out there, talking to so many people, then at least it's good for you to hear the kind of the counter argument, and then you can kind of make your decision from there, I suppose.
Yeah. And so you shared that article with me. I shared it on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
I will post that same article on the show notes for this episode as well. So I said that I don't like infographic CVs. I don't think they have enough information. I think they work for a certain type of people, like in marketing or CEOs. Because I looked at the article, you have example of Elon Musk and the CEO of Yahoo, right? Yeah. So how can a sales engineer work on a CV that's infographic that still reflects what they can do for the company?
So I think, so first of all, in terms of when I talk about infographic CVs, I don't mean kind of real left field out there, crazy design and so on. It's basically, my interpretation would be a well formatted, easy to read document that's in the same way that if you look at the website for a customer, for example, like the first video that you'll see will be a short 5-minute video that gives you kind of a headline of the value, and then you get it's not an in-depth kind of technical video. You go into that later on, and I think the same is true for infographic CVs. I think that the reason that I personally like them is, well, I mean, for me personally, intuitively as a recruiter, they work. In terms of the feedback that I've got from hiring managers, it's universally been positive. I've never heard anything negative, and I think ultimately, hiring managers are the kind of the litmus test in terms of whether they're effective or not, or whether they should be considered. And I think that, so the reason I think they're good is, I think there's 3 reasons. So number one, from a visualization perspective, I think the science is pretty clear that the way our brains are wired, we're wired to we respond really well to like visuals and colors and pictures, in the same way that we do with stories. It's just kind of, I suppose, how our brains have evolved. And if you look at, for example, like a TED talk, I always think are really interesting to watch, because they're subject matter experts who deliver kind of world-class presentations. And there's tons of storytelling there, but there's also tons of use. So if you look at the slides that they put up, it's always very simple pictures or diagrams. And because, and I would say that the reason that they're doing that is because they're aware that it gets kind of just, gets remembered well. And then I think in terms of, and touching on your point before, Ramsey, around having enough information there, there's a quote that I really like, which is, I think it's Mark Twain. And so he starts off a letter. You've heard this, yeah? So
I used it yesterday on the podcast.
Really?
Yeah, tell the people.
Wow.
I butchered it. So if you have,
fine.
You remember it, please say it.
Okay, so he starts a letter saying, I must apologize. I would have written a shorter letter if I'd had more time.
Yeah.
So yeah, and if in the 18 whatever's conciseness and brevity was valued by readers, then in 2020, when we're all running around like headless chickens, busy, then it definitely is. So I think that's something that really helps. And then the final piece is in terms of So, it's with SaaS roles, which are the roles that I often work on, a cornerstone of a good SaaS solution is elegant, simple, easy to navigate user experience. And so if a CV is kind of really wordy and so on and so forth, it doesn't necessarily kind of reflect that 100%, in my opinion.
Okay, so when you're creating infographic CV, is it the same information that you would write it in a normal CV? Or let me back up, because that's Benny's question that I just stole. But you mentioned that managers are okay with it, right?
Yeah.
And you enjoy it. But do you have like any information about like, would the manager would have preferred more a full CV, or are they preferring us to go more towards the infographic side?
Okay, so from my experience, managers. So let's say, for example, that you're a Salesforce consultant at Accenture, for example. Everybody knows what Accenture do. Everybody knows what a Salesforce consultant is. I mean, you may have an area of specialization which would need to be included there, but you don't necessarily need to go into too much depth. And when you're talking about, a project that you're especially proud of from 10 years ago, that's just not necessarily super relevant. So I suppose you're balancing having something that the manager can read through and get a quick overview or a quick understanding of your profile, and things like achievements are definitely you want to have in there 100%. I think that's something that doesn't need to be omitted, but it's a bit like I think I found when I've written stuff in the past, for example, I tend to write really wordy and go over the top and so on, and it's a real effort to condense it down, but the impact to the reader at the end is that it's condensed down to the information that's kind of needed. I mean, if you feel especially worried about not having enough technical information there, for example, you can attach an additional document that can then be read if the manager is the sort of person that really wants to go into depth. That's fine, but I think overall, kind of a less is more is quite effective, especially these days when people read through CVs pretty fast. And at the end of the day, what's important is an overview of your skills, and most importantly, like an idea of your achievements, which is ultimately what's going to demonstrate that you can kind of do the job well.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, there's baseline skills that everybody should have. Like if you're a sales engineer, you work with customers, so you don't necessarily have to add that to your resume. You eliminate the redundancies. You assume, like, you give credit to the hiring manager that they know that if you have that role, you already have this information, you already know that, and you focus on the important stuff. Correct. You just explained it much better than I did. Thank you. Oh, no, my pleasure. I had the foresight of or a hindsight of actually listening to you talking formally.
Yeah, so maybe for those of us that maybe haven't had that foresight, I suppose, or maybe haven't taken a look at the article that you shared, certainly will after this, though. Why don't you give us maybe an example of how infographics can be used on a resume? So I'm coming from a place of ignorance. I don't really know maybe what type of information would be included, kind of alluded to by what Ramsey was talking about earlier. What does that look like for you?
Yeah, sure. So again, I don't think it's a case of using infographics for the sake of them. It's a question of saying, is a graphic of some sort, will it be more, is it an easier way to get across what I'm trying to say or not? Okay. So for example, if you wanted to provide an idea of your industry experience, a pie chart with your industry experience broken down by how much time you spent, for example, it's just a very, it's quite a quick, easy, accessible way of understanding that.
Yeah, like in my mind, I'm thinking of ideas right now. I list, like in 2015, I made 120% of quota. In 2016, I made 60% of quota. That could be an infographic graph where I show, have an XY axis and write down certain things. That will look better than just listing them down. In terms of technical knowledge, like I have different skills and I'm good at them at different levels, and I can have like red is I suck at it and green is giving at it, and just highlight them in different colors, and instead of writing expert knowledge in, I'll just have
and that second one's the classic. You've got the different levels of solution or technical expertise, and then you've got like a bar chart coming out. So yeah.
What I'm gonna want to do, let's see if I have time. I'm going to change my resume from the current standard way to an infographic resume and share it with you, John, and maybe you can critique it either live or whatever. Then see if you're interested in that. But
yeah, for sure.
Okay.
For sure. Something also I would say about CVs is, at the end of the day, a CV, it's a marketing document, and it serves the purpose to get you to the first interview and to create a good first impression. So I think that it's important to, put the effort in to that extent, but it's not going to do more beyond that. I think, time spent preparing for interviews and things like that is probably better spent after that. If you see what I mean?
Yeah.
The CV is definitely not going to get you the job on its own. That's for sure.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Although sometimes that first step of just getting noticed, definitely for human eyes, an infographic would be great, no doubt. Would you say that there's still the ability for these types of CVs to get picked up by an applicant tracking system?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I don't know. I think that the honest answer, I don't know the technical ins and outs. I think that that's one of the downsides. I think if you've got text in there, it should be able to, but yeah, that's potentially one of the downsides. And that said, it's applicant tracking systems. I think recruiters tend to use LinkedIn more for search, or look at the network of people they know already and so on. I don't think they're necessarily doing that much search on their own applicant tracking systems. I may be wrong, of course, but that's from my kind of personal experience.
So to highlight something, it may not necessarily work if someone's just trying to apply directly to a company's website, but if they're going through a recruiter or going directly to a hiring manager through their contacts, which is the best way to get a job,
100%.
An infographic could work.
Correct, exactly. It will get through the applicant tracking system. I just don't know whether it can then be searched against afterwards.
Okay.
Thinking about it probably can do, because if it's a document with text and they can read the text, maybe not the pictograms or whatever, but the text will be there for sure.
Okay. All right. So I think we've beat that to death. We're gonna do a separate session where we're gonna look at my CV and get free consultation being on this podcast. But in general, what are hiring managers looking for these days from sales engineers?
Okay, so I mean, I'll go back to the points I was making before in terms of like somebody that's able to really gain the trust and credibility. I think that's the key one from my perspective, and have the communication skills to demonstrate the value and work well with account executives. I think in terms of the way I look at it is hiring managers are looking along kind of three levels. Okay, so number one is your solution experience, your industry knowledge, your kind of your hard skills, if you see what I mean, your pre-sales experience and so on. And then they're looking for your level of motivation. I mean, if you've worked with somebody that is, incredibly motivated and driven, we've all seen that can, kind of get you through adversity and strongly motivated people always perform well, and that can be to do with to what extent the role kind of aligns with your with your aspirations and where you want to go with your career. And then I think the big one is underlying abilities, attributes, things like creativity, curiosity, work ethic, accountability, communication skills, how articulate you are, how customer focused you are, all those sorts of areas. I think that the hard skills get you into interview and they can get you to the final stage. But I think hiring managers will always hire on underlying abilities and attributes, because that kind of defines the ceiling of your ability and how fast you can pick up the competencies and how well, I suppose, you can execute those competencies. Did that make sense?
Yeah, it does. How can people show their motivation and all that intangible stuff in a resume, to maybe get priority interviews over other people?
So I'm thinking, so from my perspective, I think that you can, if you want to talk about what you think your attributes are and so on and so forth, and it's not validated, I don't think it has that much weight. it's neutral. It's good to have that information there, but unless it's kind of proven, it's people don't necessarily kind of take it for granted, if you see what I mean. So I think that you can talk to you can talk about your values, for example, or you can talk about your, where you think you're strong and so on. But I think all of that ultimately will be tested later on. So I think that part is being more evaluated during the interview stage, and then the hard skills part is the part that gets you through to the interview, and achievements as well, by the way, because obviously anybody that's got a clear upward trajectory or has a clear line of achievements wherever they've been working, then that would suggest that the person not only can do the job but can do it well. You see what I mean? So I think those are definitely great things to have in your CV. But I think the attributes, I don't know, maybe that's more for later on.
In a CV, you can't really say I am trustworthy or I am motivated, but you can show it by saying like, hey, I worked on this project which was not part of my job description, or I went above and beyond there. So there are ways to show it.
Correct.
Obviously, these are still words, but you're not flat out saying, okay, I'm the best. You're just saying like, I did extra stuff here. So during the interview process, they may actually find out if that's true or not.
Correct. And those examples you used were more achievements that demonstrate the underlying. So that's 100% absolutely can be used. Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe a quick little follow-up too to when you were mentioning kind of what you're looking for, particularly around, say, looking at how motivated they may be about one thing versus another. Are you looking for motivation with respect to the role of sales engineering and kind of being that pre-sales person, or are you looking for being motivated to maybe know more, or they're motivated within the context of this particular industry and this niche that this company is within, or are you looking for a combination of both, or how does that all look for you?
Yeah, so I think it's a combination of everything. I think that if you feel comfortable that the role that you're talking to a candidate about really fits with where they're looking to take their career, then you can be confident that they're going to walk in super motivated. And if it's a stretch for them, if it's a step forward that's going to be difficult at the beginning, so it could be somebody that's really motivated to move into pre-sales, for example, that's done some pre-sales work but hasn't been full time on pre-sales, and you talk to them and they talk about, this is the next step I want to take in my career into pre-sales, then you can feel, pretty confident that that person is going to do everything within their power to make sure it happens, whereas if the role doesn't align, or you get the sense that it's not exactly what they're looking to do, then they, even if they're really capable and they're able to do the job well for the first 6 months or whatever, I think once the honeymoon period's over, then it becomes more difficult. And like, incidentally, this is so sometimes people that have been in manager positions and apply for individual contributor roles, this is where sometimes you need to have a really strong argument to make as to why you want to take that change, because hiring managers often feel concerned that the person is looking for a job or wants to move into this role for whatever reason, but to what extent 4 or 5 months later, when they feel they've taken a step back, can they maintain that kind of internal fire?
Yeah, maybe a quick little follow-up to that even. It's always kind of fascinated me, this idea between whether it be recruiters or even back when I was in school, they're career counselors as well. They kind of read into this idea of you maybe seeming like you're wanting one thing, but in reality, they can maybe see a little bit further than you can around how it might not actually be as best a fit as the candidate themselves may think it to be. Do you have any telltale signs that kind of give it away for you, whether or not a client is either, or not a client rather, but whether or not a candidate is either super maybe motivated, or they would be more motivated than they may know themselves to be, or the opposite of them kind of walking into a trap, into something that they're not a good fit for?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I like to think that I can suss every candidate out, but I'm sure lots of them have pulled one past me in the past in terms of saying the right things and so on. I think you build up, you get a good idea talking to people and talking about why people are interested in doing things, why they want to do this. I think you build up a pretty good idea. But ultimately, a candidate, it's not. I suppose for the individual, it's more important to be focused on doing something that fits your motivations. That you'd have to question yourself as to why you're going for a job that isn't necessarily, super interesting for you. There are lots of different circumstances and reasons why, I suppose. But so yeah, that's what I would say. I think you develop a feel for it over time. but there's no I can't think off the top of my head now of a telltale sign.
Oh, fair enough. Still good though. Yeah.
That's the reason you have like 17,000 interviews in sales, which is like a good segue to talk about the interview process and what it looks like. I've talked to people in the US and Canada, and there is a process that's fairly known. I'm curious if it's different, or what would the process be in the UK and EMEA?
So in EMEA, I think it's pretty aligned to the US. I mean, lots of the vendors are US vendors. So it normally looks like a first interview with like an external recruiter like myself, or an internal or an in-house recruiter, and you then go through to a first interview with the hiring manager. And then after that, there's kind of 1, 2, 3 interviews with different stakeholders. So it could be a sales director or the manager's manager or somebody that has technical expertise, for example. And then it normally culminates in a final kind of demo or presentation interview where you go in, you're asked to do a demo or a presentation, normally in front of a panel. And then for some of the kind of the new breed of SaaS firms, they like to bring candidates in for a half day, and you'll do that demo presentation and then do like kind of speed dating interviews with 4 or 5 different people from the team and different stakeholders, and they build out from there. So there are, different vendors have got. I've worked with a vendor recently who have they call it a chronological interview. So it's an interview where you go through in depth. They basically walk through the CV of the candidate and ask about why they've taken certain decisions at certain moments, and they're kind of looking for self-awareness and that sort of thing. So different, every now and then something different comes up, but I'd say 80% of the time that's the standard process.
Okay, and like, what would the hiring manager be looking for? Why do we need 17,000 interviews? Why wouldn't the hiring manager interview be enough to make the decision?
Yeah, so that's a good question. To be honest, I think it's maybe the same question you could ask when you're selling technology to customers. No, you've got, it's a bit decision by committee, and lots of people need to be involved and so on. It is good to get different input. When you're interviewing, I suppose there's a risk of different biases. And so if you've got that leveled out across different managers, then if one picks up on something, if one's had a bad experience with a certain type of profile and this person has that profile, it doesn't mean that that's necessarily a problem with all candidates. And so being able to avoid those biases, I suppose, is useful. But to be honest, I think it's more about getting more eyeballed on the individual. And it's a shame because quite often you get asked the same questions in different interviews, which shouldn't happen, but it does.
Oh, well, even in sales, we ask the same question just in different ways, so we can see if we can get different answers from the people we're working with.
In that case, then fair enough.
Yeah, like I've seen that. I don't know if they do it on purpose, but sometimes, like, you tell one person a story and then they ask the same question in the next interview and you tell them a different story altogether. It's like, oh wait, hold on, there's something not fitting here. There's making something up. So yeah. So go ahead, Benny. You had a comment.
Yeah. I just thought at one point around kind of having multiple people's perspective to kind of get over their own particular biases was interesting, because you, John, did something that I've seen a few of my friends do it actually on LinkedIn that some people might see as being brave, some people might not disclose it, but time that you spent not working, traveling, for example, are times blotches that you kind of have on your LinkedIn as, yes, I went traveling to do whatever, biking around Asia or spend some time with my wife, whatever it may be, which I thought to be awesome. That's you have to make those decisions in your life to, to experience something, let's say, if you're kind of over the whole work piece for a little bit. Have you ever had clients perhaps not like to see those gaps on people's resumes and on people's experiences?
So I think that the gaps definitely need to be justified. You'll get, if there are gaps, there'll be questions normally. I think that I would say it would be a bit churlish of somebody to resent somebody of having taken 6 months off to do whatever. It could be a vocation of their own, or it could be to travel, whatever it may be. I think it shows, there's a lot of positives there in terms of having the courage to go and do things, and So I've never had a hiring manager bring that up as an issue. Could some find it issue sometimes? I imagine so. Personally, I think the majority these days are pretty cool with this and see it as a positive and are quite kind of full of admiration as opposed to seeing it as an issue.
Totally.
I might be wrong.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say I might be wrong, but that's the impression I have.
No, I think I'm inclined to agree. I mean, I came from a program in school where of a large number of students, they want to do exchanges and whatnot. And just hearing about those experiences always kind of had me wishing I meant to even do it. But anyways, it always seemed very justifiable to kind of go off and have a life experience like that ultimately does develop you, especially we were taking international business. So it only made sense. But I would, it's very comforting to hear that most of the recruiters that you've ever spoken to, or most of the clients that you're speaking to, don't see that life experience as a bad thing or as a negative thing, so long as it can be justified. That's good.
Yeah, and I think it separates you as well from it makes you a bit more authentic, a bit more individual, and I think people like to see that.
Totally, I agree.
Yeah, like I like to add these things to my resume. Like I do have We the Sales Engineers on my resume just to show that, hey, I'm doing something extra. And I don't know if someone wants to put like biking around the world in their resume, I think it'll be a good thing and it'll be something that pops out. Some people don't like to put that sort of thing in their resume because it's not a job description, but it shows it's a life experience, which could help them, especially with people in different areas of the world.
No, and so for example, any work, like for example, like with you, Ramsey, having done with a sales engineer, it would reflect incredibly well on you for sure, and I think, and also including hobbies as well, it's got nothing to do with work, but if you've been involved in amateur level sports, for example, then they say that people from that have got a sporting background make great salespeople just from having the discipline and having the resilience and getting over frustration. And again, it just paints a bit of a personal picture.
Yeah. For sure. So before we even start the interview process, when do you ask the candidate how much they want to earn? Is that you or is that somebody else? Because I find it weird. Go ahead. No, sorry.
I was interrupting before you finished.
No, it's just I personally don't like being asked that on the first date. Like, how much you want to get? What's the range you're looking for? Because I don't know anything about the role itself. So how do you figure out how much they want to get paid before going into the whole process?
So I normally I normally ask during the first conversation. I'm afraid to say, sorry. And the reason is that it makes no sense for us all to get really excited about a candidate and then to find out that their expectations or where they're at salary wise, can't be met by the company. And so it's like a qualification question at the beginning. But I appreciate that it might be uncomfortable, especially right at the very beginning.
It does make sense. We do that in sales. When we go meet a customer, we have to make sure they have the budget to pay for whatever we're trying to sell them. So, but that's from a company's perspective, right? It just, for me, it feels like personal, and I don't know how much. How do you coach people to answer that question? It's part of the negotiation in the end. How do you coach people to answer that question? Yeah,
and it's interesting because when you say it's a part of the negotiation to the end, it's the beginning. That's where the negotiation happens there and at the very end, and there's kind of nothing in the middle. So most of the candidates that I speak with are passive, so they're not necessarily looking to make a change, or they're not kind of actively looking. Some are actively looking as well, and so I need to tread really carefully to make sure that. So I try to understand what their current salary is and what their expectations are before I disclose to them the range. And the reason I do that is I don't want. So if somebody is a little bit over the range, but they have an incredible profile, then often companies can go the extra mile if they need to, if you can justify it. And I don't want to scare people off. And on the flip side, if the range is say 8 to 12, to give a number, and the candidate's looking for 10, once you've said 8 to 12, there's the risk that the 12 could be taken as where the offer will come in. And so when you get to the end, they're expecting 12 when actually 12 is for exceptional profiles and they would have been happy with 10. So it's just a kind of an expectations game thing. So I try to talk it through as openly as possible. I think that's the best way to.
It is so similar to sales engineering or sales in general, because if you give the customer a range, hey, between 8 to 12, the customer here is 8, we hear 12, right? And now you have that disconnect. So when I'm giving a range, like if I'm doing budget, I always like to give, like, if it's 8 to 12, I would say it's like, because I want the higher number, I say it's between 12 and 14, and that way they hear 12.
Right.
Then if I come down to 10, it's like, hey, we talked about it. I know I said 12, but based on the information we discussed, it's 10. They're like, oh, you just saved me 2, whatever.
Yeah.
So that always works out.
That's a depth negotiation.
Well, they always say, like, yeah, like it's from like never split the difference. I didn't come up with any of that. I just hear a lot of people talking about it. Well, what was I asking? Oh, you said that negotiation doesn't happen in the middle. I disagree on that point.
Okay, good.
I feel like every time you open your mouth, it's part of the negotiation. You can either add value to yourself or remove value.
For sure. Sorry, what I meant is the money doesn't get discussed until the end.
Yeah, like, the actual discussion about money doesn't happen. Like happens at the beginning and at the end. But like you said, if someone's exceptional, you may go over 12 or something like that, and that's how you show that you're exceptional, by showing your value. So I'm just saying, don't assume that money is not being considered as you're talking technology.
Yeah, and something I'd add as well around talking about salaries and negotiation and so on is, I think that it's really important if you're looking for a role, and especially if you've not been interviewing recently, it's really important to understand what the market range is. And it's like a bell curve, and to decide on that bell curve from a capability standpoint where you think you are. If you think you're a 75th percentile SE, then that should take you to the number more or less as to what a fair salary is. And I think that's the number you want to be aiming for.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Do you have any resources that you'd recommend to candidates around maybe best site?
That's part of the not so fire round. What are you doing?
Oh no, well, sorry. Well, I guess about that question in particular around ranges.
Go ahead. I don't know if we're gonna have time for the not so fire round, so just go ahead.
Fair. Around just finding out those salary ranges and finding that bell curve for each particular role, do you have go-to resources? Yeah, I guess you're right that it's taking it from there. But
do I answer or not?
Yeah, go for it.
I shouldn't answer actually, because if I do, then you'll invent a new question on the not so far around that I won't be prepared for. So
we'll make it work.
There's a couple more questions we want to ask. I don't know if we're going to have time to the not so fire round, so we can either go to there right now, or we can just continue the conversation normal. It's up to you. Do you want the not so fire round, John?
I'm in your hands. I'm not. Whatever you think will add most value to your audience, I'm in your hands.
Okay, let's keep going. So I like Benny's question. If you don't mind answering that, and we'll just skip the not so fire round this time.
Right. Okay. So if I remember correctly, Benny, your question was: are there any resources where you can find out what the ranges are?
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. So there are. I'm not an expert here, okay, because the roles I work on tend to be very similar. I'm in a very specific niche, and so you just have the first-hand experience. You've got a pretty good feel for it. In terms of, so LinkedIn, for example, have data. Glassdoor have data, but I don't know how good the data is. Sometimes wacky numbers can come out. I don't know to what extent. I don't know where they get. I think they get the data from users as they go on. So I think that that's okay to start to have an idea, but I think you need to put your sales hat on and talk to people and try to find out. Speak to recruiters. Don't just speak to one recruiter. Speak to 3, 4, and then you get wherever's in the middle. Kind of take it there. Speak to people that that are in the industry. I think you need to find out a little bit the hard way, to be honest.
Fair. And I think that last part is key, right? Like just getting as many opinions and getting as many views as you can, because every site, every recruiter is going to have their own bias or their own view on things. And so being able to kind of triangulate maybe an accurate market sense of things will only be done by reaching out or finding out this information from multiple different resources. So cool.
Yeah.
I love that. Thank you.
And I learned that traveling. Here we go. This is an example of where it can be used from the real world. When we were trekking, for example, before the days of GPS, you'd ask people, you'd be in the mountains somewhere in the jungle. You'd say to somebody, how do we get to this place? And sometimes if they don't know, they'll just point you in a different direction because it's a bit embarrassing to say they don't know. And then you can go and walk for miles and not get to it. And so we had a rule where always ask 3 people, and then once you've got 2 answers of the same, then you can take that for granted. So there we go.
That's awesome. That's great.
And so I'm Lebanese, born and raised, and there was a thing that Lebanese people do that I hate, where let's say someone is going to a certain area and they just got there. They pull down their windows like, hey, how can I get to wherever I'm at, basically, and they point them in the wrong direction on purpose with all the confidence in the world. So, yeah, the 3 rule question: if you're going to Lebanon, not that anyone will go right now, but if you're going to Lebanon, make sure you ask 10 people, because you're not going to. Oh, actually, take a GPS. Yeah. Yes, will even play games with them. So they say don't accept the first offer. Is that actually true? Like, always negotiate for more, basically. How is that?
So
Losing the deal?
It's a tough one. From my experience, hiring managers are in my segment are very constrained by how much headcount they've got. They can't decide to hire 2 over 1 person. They're not that constrained by the budget within that on the whole. And so they want to get the best person possible for that role, and they're willing to do what's necessary to make a good offer. So if you want to squeeze the last dollar out, then of course go back, push back, and potentially it can work. It just depends on the internal constraints that the hiring manager has normally. Because at the point where they want to make you an offer, even if they've got a second choice, they really want you, as that they will do whatever's necessary to get you on board. So I think again, it's a question of if you feel that it's not a fair amount, again based on your analysis and so on and so forth, and you can justify why, then go for it. Because I don't think it's great to start a role where you from the get-go you feel like you're not getting a fair salary, if you see what I mean. But any second offer will be a minimal increase. And so it's up to you and you need to balance that out as well in terms of the relationship with the company and so on as well. But from my experience within pre-sales, at least, there's not much kind of lowball in the beginning or anything like that.
Okay, so people generally give a fair offer in the get-go, and you might be able to squeeze a couple of dollars here and there, but it's not necessarily going to make a difference to the bank.
Correct, exactly. And the other thing that hiring managers have as well to think about is they've got to think about internal parity. So they've got to think about their own team. And if you come in, because salary increases tend to be slower within an organization than they are externally in terms of how. So hiring managers also have to be a little bit aware of that as well. So that's just a consideration they have to take into account.
So out of curiosity, how do you find, like, there's a billion SEs or candidates that have the same experiences, and when you look at LinkedIn, you're going to see they have the same knowledge. How do you make a choice of calling this person over that person?
So the roles I work on tend to be pretty. They're quite hard to fill roles. They've got specific experience required in a specific solution area. So there's normally only a pool of say 40, 50 people. And then potentially more if you go to like adjacent technologies, or if you look for people from more of a consulting background, for example. And because I'm kind of playing the long game and always looking for the same types of positions, I'm happy to speak with anybody that's got a kind of 50% upwards fit. Because often you can, I've had lots of experiences where somebody doesn't look great on paper on LinkedIn. You're like, I'm not sure, but hey, I'll speak to the person, and you speak to them, and they're incredible, So I'm always willing to have that conversation for sure. And out of pure self-interest, by the way.
Yeah. How can people make sure that you see them? Because not everybody is visible. I think in LinkedIn now you can get up to like third connection or something like that for people who don't pay the extra LinkedIn money. So how can people make sure that they're found by people like you, or even hiring companies directly?
So I think most organizations on the third degree connection piece, so I think most organizations have the level of LinkedIn recruiter license whereby they can find everybody, and most recruiting firms do as well. So that shouldn't be an issue. I think in terms of, you can put keywords on there. Personally, the way I search more from companies and job titles. And then if I'm struggling, I'll then start to use keywords. So, but again, it's the keywords I'm using are more around the hard skills keywords. Okay. So ironically, we talked before about the infographic CV, about kind of taking information out. Perhaps in LinkedIn, that's where you want to make sure you've got those keywords in there.
Okay. And is there anything that people can do to market themselves a little bit better to make it easier for you to find? Like in terms of content marketing yourself?
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of, I would say that if I see a candidate's profile and they've made the effort to create some content, video content or articles, they've written articles either about pre-sales or about their area of expertise, that reflects incredibly well. That I go into the conversation with that candidate thinking this person's probably going to be great, because they've had the confidence to get themselves out there, and they've probably gone beyond what was expected of them to write the articles. So they've got a good level of kind of enthusiasm and passion for what they do. And also, just my mum used to say, the best way to learn is to teach.
Yeah.
And so by creating the content, you're becoming a better professional, if you see what I mean. And I think that these days there seems to be a lot of talk around leveraging digital media and being able to influence as a pre-seller with content marketing for your company and so on. So if you're able to show that you're this kind of new breed of person that can do that, then it's a really good kind of attractive skill to have from a company's perspective.
Nice.
That makes sense. Although maybe on the flip side of that, maybe going back to that example that you had brought up of that person that wasn't maybe so great with respect to their online presence, but you got them on the phone and they were spectacular.
Yeah.
How was that like? Or what did they do that was so great while on the phone that was obviously not at all displayed on their in their online presence?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So let's think. So I suppose at the end of the day, it goes back to what we were discussing before around abilities and attributes. And so so somebody that has a really good energy about them, level of positivity, somebody that's clearly a very articulate communicator, somebody that clearly is able to really kind of listen to questions and to answer accordingly. Sorry, I'm thinking on the fly here. I'm not giving you the best answers. And I suppose most importantly, you talk to people and you talk to them about their achievements and so on. And they've got a bucket list full of achievements that are really, really impressive, internal awards or promotions or big deals, or and just the way that they can talk through the solutions they work with and why how they're positioned versus the customer and what's important for success in pre-sales. It's kind of like the whole package together. And often it's kind of ironic, but often it's not so much the case now, but for a long time, the best profiles had the worst CVs and the worst LinkedIn profiles. You see what I mean? Because they didn't need them that much. It's changing a bit with LinkedIn now, because I think that you do need to have a strong online presence with LinkedIn. So yeah, that's what I'd say in that respect.
So if I can just maybe clarify something, basically they got you to like them on the phone.
Yes. Yeah. No. And also, there's that which is a key skill within pre-sales for sure. But it's not. I would say it's not just a likability thing as well. It's somebody that's really obviously is able to demonstrate that they performed well in the past, and also somebody that's able to articulate really clearly what they've done and why and what their company does, and shows all of the skills that we talked about before that are really important for pre-sales. And just all of those things may not be on their LinkedIn profile.
Yeah, sometimes people don't take care of their LinkedIn profile. I've seen people that have like just a job title and nothing else in there.
Yeah.
And they've been in the same company for 16 years and they've obviously been successful. So they're not looking to go.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Okay, so we asked a couple questions from the not so fire round. So let's do the two left from the not so fire round. And Benny, you want to ask the first question?
For sure, yeah. So I guess you could maybe talk about this as a recruiter with respect to pre-sales. What do you love about it? Or maybe what have you seen in the eyes of SEs that you have recruiters that show that they really love it?
Sorry, could you say what do I love about pre-sales, or what do I love about people?
Yeah, let's say that first one. What do you love about pre-sales and pre-sales recruiting?
Okay, so all right. So in terms of pre-sales, I think it goes back to what I was saying before. It's just that really nice combination of having a level of substance to them and having a really strong, people in pre-sales seem to have a real strong customer focus and they want to have impact and do things. Go to bed at night and did a good job for the customer is like the best way I can think of it. But at the same time, that kind of snappiness and you can you can really just have fast, engaging conversation. Things move forward fast. They don't overthink things, all that sort of stuff. And I don't know. I think people in pre-sales have got a good level of integrity as well in general. So and good people skills, so you can have good conversations with them.
I just noticed that you pretty much answered all the questions in the not so fire round throughout the course of the podcast. But let's see about the last one here. So what would you change about either the hiring process or the way that SEs get recruited?
Okay, so I think in terms of in terms of the way SEs get recruited, I think that that sometimes it's a bit disjointed in terms of the different hiring managers. Again, like we talked about before, asking different questions, for example. Sorry, asking the same question over and over again. I think that if they separated out all the different areas that were important, you could build a more kind of complete picture. Yeah. I think that organizations, I've always found it strange that organizations don't measure, from my viewpoint at least, don't seem to measure quality of hire that much. So they measure a lot. This is internal recruiting organizations. They'll measure time to hire as an average, number of hires and so on, but the actual quality of hire isn't measured. And so the recruiter, be that internal or external, that is able to consistently bring people into an organization that raise the bar, won't necessarily have that kind of recognition, which has always surprised me. So I'd say those two things.
Okay. Nice. All right, so we already asked all the other questions. Where can people find you, John, if they wanted to reach out?
On LinkedIn.
On LinkedIn. So
really easy.
We'll have your link on LinkedIn on the show.
Perfect.
Thanks a lot, John, for coming. This was like a fun conversation. It was. We're gonna do something else together. So
super. You just let me know.
Yeah.
Thanks both. Really appreciate it.
Bye.
Have a great day.
Cheers.
And that's the show. So, what do you think, Benny?
Yeah, it's super informative, and definitely eye-opening as well. I mean, the whole infographic piece, especially, that's just something that on a resume, it's never really something that I've personally considered putting on. But after after today's conversation, it's definitely more appealing than not, I suppose. Even if I was on the fence about it before, there's more of a case made behind them than I ever thought about before.
Yeah, I would still use my normal resume for applying online, if it has to go through the ATS system. But if I know of a contact and I just want to, we're bypassing that entire system, maybe the infographic could be useful. I don't know. I'm still on the fence. If you have a contact, you generally speaking, doesn't matter what your resume looks like, you most likely get some form of traction. But if you want to try it out, I don't see anything wrong with that. And life is an experiment, so you'll never know if it's you'll never find a better way to do something if you don't try something different. It might be worse, it might be better, but you're gonna have to try, which is kind of what in the vein of the newsletter that you sent last week, right?
Yeah. So good point.
Yeah. I read your newsletters.
Yeah, fair. Happy someone does. What was I going to say? Oh yeah, I also kind of thought it was. What was I going to say? This is really bad, but
comes with age.
Sorry.
Comes with age.
It does come with age. Goodness gracious. No, I guess yeah. Oh right. So definitely the whole try piece definitely makes sense. I think also even if you I think the infographic resume would make more of a difference when you're kind of doing a cold intro to a recruiter. So, you don't have that person referring you. However, even if you do have somebody referring you and you then give over a well done infographic resume, if let's say 5 other people referred 5 other people, and now you're up against 4 other people that have also been referred, that whole if you're able to effectively show whatever your display, whatever type of value you're trying to through that infographic, and it works well, that shows the existence of some sort of creative juices flowing, which will bode well for you against everybody else. So it is a cool way to differentiate yourself if it's done well.
Yeah, and that's the big thing. The whole point is differentiating yourself. It's still gonna come down to interviews and all that, but if you want to be on the top of the pile, try it out. That's all I'm saying. Sure. It's the same thing with sales engineering. You're gonna have to try out new techniques, new questions, new ways of asking questions. So try it out. And I appreciate John actually reaching out and telling me that, hey, I think you're wrong. He didn't say that, but he has different opinion than I do, and he has the right to them.
Yeah.
And he's very likely to be right, and I'm very likely to be wrong because I've been known to be wrong. You know, you're just gonna have to make the decision to yourself. And I think we've prolonged this conversation quite a bit. Just try it out. That's all we're saying.
Maybe one thing just to prolong it a little bit further, though,
Yay.
sorry, is if you are making it an infographic and you're not sure about it, share it around with other people and make sure that they're able to interpret what you're trying to convey in it. Not everybody may interpret it the way that you envision in your mind, but it's really important that that you get those other views on it, or other opinions on it, so that you know the recruiter will see it and interpret it the way exactly as you're expecting them to.
Actually, how about we do this? If you're thinking about doing an infographic resume, post it to LinkedIn just for the hell of it, like just for fun, and tag me on it and tag Benny so we can give you our opinions about it, because why not? We're a community, so it'll be fun. I'm going to do the same. I'm going to do that. I'm going to tag John so he can take a look at my resume, and we'll go from there. I don't know when. I'm not promising a timeline, but yeah, it'll be done.
Yeah, no, Code 2020 is just one continuous day. So, or one continuous
it'll be tomorrow at some point.
Yeah.
All right, man. Thanks, Benny. I appreciate you being here, being my partner. I'll catch you later. Do you want to take us out?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm sure you heard at the very beginning, but just a last little reminder, check out the course, or also, check out any future webinars as well that we're posting. The course, Road to Sales Engineering. So that's wetheSalesEngineers.com/R2SE. A lot of great information there for those of you that are looking to kickstart your entrance into the SEing world if you haven't done that already. Just keep on doing what you do. Yeah, exactly. Sharing our content and just taking it in and all that. So thank you all. And this is Benny for Ramsey signing off.